Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to today's discussion where we're just going to talk a little bit about the ongoing kind of rage fest and drama and pushback between community or multiple aspects or multiple groups within inside the Path of Exile community and the developers at Grinding Gear Games, as everything seems to have kind of come to a head with the upcoming 321 Crucible League's Ruthless boss kill race event for solo self-found hardcore Ruthless. Wow, that is a mouthful. I'm going to lay out a couple of different thoughts, a couple of different perspectives to keep in mind as we are engaging in this conversation, and then try and make some sense of where each party and where each group is kind of coming from, as well as I will share some of my own opinion. I generally try, believe it or not to share too much of my own opinion, because I think that my opinion is in general vastly inferior to the opinions of many others who are already broadcasting their opinion loudly and proudly on lots of different platforms in lots of different ways. So I usually try and keep my own thoughts pretty much to myself and just generally report to you on what other people might be thinking or trying to interpret what other folks are thinking. But today I'll share some of my own thoughts as well. So there seems to be a couple of different groups or a couple of different perspectives coming into the entire discussion about Ruthless. Here's where I, yours truly, am coming from. A brief recap, brief history. I've played Path of Exile as my main game since 2016. I first started playing and was introduced to the game in 2013 from my best friend who taught me about the game and said, you really need to come over and play Path of Exile. It blows the absolute pants off of Diablo 3. You need to drop that Diablo stuff and come play some Path of Exile. And at first, long story short or long story long, depending on how you want to look at it, he was absolutely right. And I've been playing Path of Exile for the most part as my main game ever since being introduced, and then really getting hooked in 2016 and deciding not just to learn about the game myself, but also to share whatever I'm learning and observing in the community with everybody else that enjoys this same game as a hobby. So that's a little bit of my background. I primarily play as a summoner player. That's most of where my time has been spent for the last several years. It's been a joke here inside the G3 community for me to play something that's not summoner. That's been like a sub goal that we've hit. It's been something that we've messed around with and toyed with and had fun with as a community, that I wouldn't play summoners for a while. So all that brings us up to why Ruthless. I took about a year break. Lots of different factors that came into that, why I took a year break. I'm not going to bore you with all of that. Ultimately, one of the contributing factors to why I took a year break from Path of Exile was because I was feeling burnt out from the game. I didn't like what I was experiencing while I was playing the game. And if you're not having fun, that's a big thesis that you'll hear from me a lot of the time. If you're not having fun, then you're losing. That's really the only wrong way to play a game, is if you're not having a good time. This is your hobby time, and if you're not enjoying it, then that's a problem. That's where you're actually losing in a game like Path of Exile. So I stopped having fun for a time, took a break for about a year, came back. When I came back, Ruthless was reintroduced, or was introduced, not reintroduced. I was reintroduced to the game and was introduced into the Ruthless game mode, and it was absolutely thrilling. I set aside a goal, which is there above my shiny balding forehead, for the league, to play basically one character class and get them to Katava in Ruthless hardcore solo self-found mode. I didn't really want to interact with maps much. It seemed like coming into the league, maps were going to be a problem, right? It seemed like map sustain was going to be a problem. That was a lot of the feedback from players going into Ruthless before its official launch. And so I didn't really want to care about interacting with the Atlas. That in and of itself was like a big old mind-blowing experience to come back and see all the changes to the Atlas. And the fact that the Atlas tree now has passives, that was a big mind-blowing change. So I just wanted to get back into the habit of leveling characters and experiencing what the game was like in Ruthless for the leveling character experience, which is what the vast majority of what all of us have to go through, whether or not you're going to make it into yellow maps, red maps, or white maps, whatever. If you get to maps, then you will have had to level a character. So I just wanted to repeat that kind of experience of leveling a character. And so I did so. I played a Slayer, played a Hierophant, played a Juggernaut, played a Raider, played a Sabo, played a Necro, had several deaths along the way, also played an Ascendant, and had a great time. Had a blast. Did not complete my stretch goal, my ultimate goal of getting everybody to Katava before I ran out of time with the challenge and needed to go and do other things with life. Anyway, it was a great time. I've enjoyed Ruthless for a lot of different reasons, but that's where I'm coming from today. So the drama seems to be surrounding this entire issue is that there's a couple of different groups and a couple of different perspectives, I being one of those perspectives that's coming into this discussion. One of the perspectives is coming from Grinding Gear Games. Grinding Gear Games has an agenda for Ruthless. Even if Grinding Gear Games says we have no agenda for Ruthless, even in and of that statement itself, you can just know that that statement is not true. Anybody that's taking actions to do something has an agenda, right? So GGG is taking actions to develop Ruthless. Even if it's just done as a hobby side project, that's still an agenda. We're developing Ruthless as a hobby. That's an agenda, right? It doesn't mean it's some overarching conspiracy theory. Like, I don't need to go tell my wife to go grab me a tinfoil hat because, GGG is developing Ruthless. It's just the reality of the thing. GGG is developing Ruthless. That's a perspective. That is a part of this discussion, right? That high-level folks, people who make big-time decisions at Grinding Gear Games, want to see Ruthless do well. They're having fun developing Ruthless, and they see some value in it, whether that's value just for their own enjoyment, or if that value is something else, contributing for the game and contributing to their thought processes in developing Path of Exile 1 and 2. That's where maybe we need to get the tinfoil hats out and maybe make some predictions, some projections. Maybe there's some fear involved in other perspectives in the community, but we've got to at least recognize that that is a perspective. The developers of Path of Exile are putting together Ruthless. They're putting it out there. They have put it out there. It's now available. This upcoming 321 Crucible League is going to be the first league where there are independent challenges. You're going to have, an ability to show off in your hideout that you have performed the 8 challenges, the 8 very difficult challenges in Ruthless League. This is going to be the first time that that's going on, and so clearly there is some level of support from Grinding Gear Games for Ruthless moving forward. So that's one perspective. We've got the developers who care about Ruthless at least enough to still be ongoing with it as a development process, and it's even getting its own section in the patch notes now, right? So it's not just that they have their own separate patch notes that Ruthless gets, updated on a different timeline. It's getting updated with the main bulk patch notes whenever there's an expansion or a patch release. So just be aware of that. Bug fixes are getting fixed. When there's regular small patches and updates, there are bugs that are being fixed in Ruthless all the time. So it is a full-on part of Path of Exile. As soon as I've said that, I've upset a whole bunch of you. I recognize that. Like, for some people, just saying the name Ruthless is like nails on a chalkboard. Okay? I recognize that. I recognize it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I keep saying the R word, but that's a perspective. The developers are making Ruthless. It's a thing, okay? The whole stop trying to make Ruthless a thing, sorry. It's not up to me. It's not up to you. GGG has said we're making this regardless of whether or not it's quote-unquote profitable or popular. We're going to keep making it. So that's one perspective. Another perspective is the full-time streamer. The full-time streamer who might be saying, look, I don't want to play Ruthless because it's not good for my audience. It's not good for my own revenue. It's not good for my own enjoyment of the game. It's not good necessarily for my work. It's not necessarily compelling for me to be able to pump out content and pump out streams and videos, etc. on Ruthless. That's another group, right? These two groups are not necessarily going to see eye to eye on everything. That's true in almost all game development, right? Players in general and developers don't always see eye to eye on everything for lots of different reasons. For this reason, though, we've got to recognize that there is a group of people that exist that have a large voice in the community because they are representative of a lot of other people in the community who would like to play certain styles, certain modes of Path of Exile. Both players who want to see that and both players who want to play that, right? So there's certain modes and certain styles of Path of Exile that players want to play. Streamers represent one style. Full-time streamers specifically. I'm not including a whole bunch of folks who stream casually. Hi, my name's G3Iron. I just stream casually. I don't do this as my full-time employment. I've got other work, thankfully, that God has provided for me to do to provide for my family, right? So I don't have to worry about, oh my goodness, if I switch to stream from hardcore solo self-found regular POE to Ruthless, am I hurting my bottom line and my ability to pay bills? That is a legitimate concern for some people. All right? Legit. Completely legitimate concern. If something happens at work where your paycheck is being impacted for yourself and for your ability to provide for your family, that's a big deal, right? So I'm not saying that just because someone streams a game full time that somehow we should not count them. Like, they are another voice in this conversation, right? So there's the developer, there's the full-time streamer. There's also the viewer of the full-time streamer, right? Oftentimes we watch things that we like, we support things that we enjoy. And so not only do the full-time streamers state their own opinion representative for themselves, but they're also speaking to a general trend in the community. There's a reason why there's a fear for some full-time streamers. If they have to switch over to Ruthless, they'll lose viewers and it will hurt their bottom line. The reason is people don't necessarily want to watch Ruthless. I can speak to this myself, having come back and come back into the Path of Exile scene. I don't have any firm numbers that I'm going to share with you today. I can give you a general trend, though, and a general sense. When I was making regular Path of Exile YouTube-related content and Twitch streaming content and all that sort of stuff, all of the metrics playing regular Path of Exile before I took my year hiatus break, all of those trends said, look, you're trending upward, right? In terms of your subscriptions and in terms of the number of people joining your Discord, in terms of the number of people who are following you on these different platforms. Okay, so that's me, just a casual guy. I don't have to care about those numbers whatsoever because I'm just playing as a hobby. For somebody who's playing to feed themselves and feed their family and build a career out of this, that really matters. I took my year break. I've come back. Basically, almost all that I've covered has been primarily Ruthless, with an occasional break here or there, with some build comparison videos and some general overhead discussions. But most of my stuff has been about Ruthless. Since coming back, the trends have said, whoa, you're not growing unless people want to watch your stuff. And I'm completely fine with that. I'm simply using that as a data point. Granted, it's anecdotal, but as a data point to say, look, if I as a casual hobbyist can see the data there, that would definitely cause me to be sympathetic to people who are relying on streaming Path of Exile as their income for themselves and for their family. That causes me to be big time sympathetic to them if they're saying, look, here's a big time game mode with prizes that are being offered. It's being promoted by Grinding Gear Games, and it's frustrating because it means it's going to cost me money if I participate in this. And so there's some tension there, okay? The viewership of that entire audience is representative of potentially tens of thousands of people who play and who watch Path of Exile. So that's another third group. It's kind of an adjacent group to the full-time streamer, but that is a group of people who just want to watch stuff, and they might not want to watch specific Ruthless stuff. Maybe they don't want to have to type in Ruthless into the YouTube or Google video, search tab whenever they're looking for info. Maybe they just want POE in general. They don't want to do this perceived to be tedious, slow mode of Path of Exile, the no fun version of Path of Exile that some players have referred to Ruthless as and named it. So you've got several different groups and several different voices that are involved in this conversation. Then you've got other folks involved in this conversation who aren't necessarily going to fit into any of these categories. They're not Grinding Gear Games developers. They're not going to be full-time streamers. They're not even going to be hobbyist streamers. They're just going to be players who play, and they really couldn't care less much about the drama of what's going on. But there is a general sense inside the community of whether or not things are going in a positive direction or not. These might be what we could call, if they were, people in a superhero movie, these are people on the streets of whatever big name city where, superhero and supervillain are doing battle. These are people who are this sounds awful even saying it, but these are unnamed people. They're still people, but for the purposes of the movie, they're just there to create drama and up the stakes for whether or not the villain is really a villain and the hero is really a hero. You don't really get the backstory on these people. You don't know much about them. They're just bystanders. They're there. They're a part of it. And potentially stuff is going to impact them. And they're either terrified or they're excited because they're getting saved. That is a large chunk of the Path of Exile community. Don't necessarily have a dog in the fight, whether or not there is a hardcore solo self-found Ruthless boss kill event or not. They're not planning on playing in a race, no matter what style of Path of Exile it's in. They've got their favorite streamers. Maybe they don't. Maybe they just have a friend who knows what's going on in Path of Exile. Maybe these people don't ever interact with third-party stuff like YouTube, like Twitch, like Reddit, etc. Maybe literally they just boot up the game and play Path of Exile, and they've got a buddy or a friend who likes to send them stuff and keep them more informed about the game in general, but they're really, frankly, too chill and too cool to be too bothered about anything that's going on. For those folks, we're going to call that group the bystander group. For the bystander, there is still a rub-off effect of what the general tenor and tone and perceived direction of how Path of Exile is progressing as a game or being developed as a game. There's still a perception there, right? Oftentimes these bystanders, the unnamed masses, can be influenced in a lot of different ways. They can be influenced by one of these other groups that are going on. The hobbyist group, the Twitch full-time streamer group, the developers at Grinding Gear Games group, as well as maybe some others. But you've got multiple different voices that are all contributing to this storm of a conversation. When there is a storm and a difference of opinion within inside a community, we've got to identify who are the stakeholders. We've done that so far. And then we need to identify what are the stakes. What are genuinely at stake for people? We've discussed a little bit of this. For the bystander, there isn't necessarily that much at stake other than Path of Exile potentially being the game that they boot up for, opening weekend and maybe the second weekend. But other than that, maybe not. There's not much at stake for them. Maybe it's a weekend or two worth of fun, but they play lots of other games. They do lots of other things. So really, if Path of Exile is going in a direction that they feel like they don't want to play, that's okay. They got lots of other games. If it's going in a positive direction, fantastic. They're not necessarily going to up their engagement with the game and all of a sudden move from that kind of bystander mode into like a super hardcore supporter of the game mode. That's a pretty rare thing for players to do that. For the other folks, there's some serious stakes involved. We've already talked about streamers and their income. Let's talk about Grinding Gear Games again and what's at stake for them. For Grinding Gear Games, it is a long-time game as a service model. It is now at a stage where it is far beyond where most games as a service model survive. It is a long-standing game. It's won several awards for, Passion Project and lots of other different awards as a long-time service game, games as a service category, ongoing, still developed game with support from its developer. When Path of Exile 2 was announced, Grinding Gear Games was very explicit, very clear. We are not ditching PO1. POE 1 in order to develop POE 2. We're not saying thank you for all your money with POE 1 and now we want to go develop the game that we've really always wanted to develop. There are plenty of developers out there who do that, by the way. Grinding Gear Games has not done that. Grinding Gear Games has said we're going to take POE 1, we're going to also develop a thing that we want to develop in POE 2, and we're actually going to make these things merge. They're going to be the same game, you're going to run them off the same exe file. What does this have to do with Ruthless, and what does this have to do with the boss kill event and the drama going on? The stakes for Grinding Gear Games are pretty high because they don't have very many ways that they can test things for Path of Exile 2 and test things for future iterations of Path of Exile 1 without there being just massive blowback from a huge portion of the community. If they want to develop something that they continually enjoy and are not burned out in developing, by the way, that's another thing that can happen genuinely in creative situations where creators just get burned out in making new creative stuff. That can genuinely happen. People leave the gaming industry because they go, you know what, I just heard too much junk from my coworkers or too much junk from the internet about this thing that I was pouring my heart, my soul, my time, my efforts into, and nobody liked it. I'm out. That happens to plenty of people, okay, inside the gaming industry. Not just anecdotal, you can go and do research on it and see how folks change in their industry patterns and in their careers. That's a trend. That's a thing that people do. So inside Grinding Gear Games, there's multiple different things that are at stake. There's the enjoyment of the development of the game. There's the ongoing environment in which the game is being developed, in which the company where people are coming to work every single day are going to enjoy their work and enjoy what they are producing at large for their bosses and for the community who's going to play the game. Then there's another factor, this ongoing development where there is essentially a test case, many games nowadays have an ongoing, they have different acronyms for it, but a privately tested beta server somewhere, or maybe it's a publicly tested beta server. Somewhere where the game company can go in and say, look, here are changes that we want to make to the game. What do you, as a select few portion in the community, think of this? And in general, while there's more and more community involvement nowadays, as there are more and more full-time streamers involved in playing games, in general, the bystander is not affected by that stuff that's going on the beta environment, right? In general, that stuff is for the hardcore audience of the game who's playing the game no matter what and giving feedback on hating the game, loving the game, etc. either way. But the bystander, the great masses of people, aren't necessarily interacting with that stuff. The test is there to see whether or not it's going to be received, how it's going to be received, and whether or not ultimately the stuff that's getting tested should then be applied to the wider game. So, this brings me all to the summary of where we're at with this entire controversy. Grinding Gear Games has every single right to put forward a boss kill event in whatever mode they want to develop, right? Don't be tricked. Don't be tricked. We've said this in the past on multiple things that Grinding Gear Games has done, sometimes miscommunications, sometimes misdirections. Genuinely, sometimes they've misdirected us as a community. That can happen. Companies can say one thing and then do another, and then we as consumers and as clients and as users of a platform can go, hey, I feel like I've been betrayed. That can happen, okay? It has happened in the past with Grinding Gear Games. It probably will happen in the future. One of the great things about Grinding Gear Games is they seem to iterate on that, learn from it, and then hopefully improve on it. Not always, and there's plenty of exceptions to the rule. They're not a perfect gaming company. I do think they are one of the best gaming companies that's out there at the moment. So with all this going on, Grinding Gear Games has every right to say, look, this is where we want to host the event. We want to host it in Ruthless, and we can see some of the stakes that are involved. They're trying potentially to draw more eyeballs and draw more attention to Ruthless. Why would they want to do that? Think back to the stakes. They want more feedback on Ruthless. Maybe that's because Ruthless is impacting the development of Path of Exile 1, and it's also going to continue to impact the development of Path of Exile 2. It seems to be that that's the trend. It genuinely seems to be that. There are changes that are being made to the passive tree. There are changes that are being made to the mastery system, to ascendancies. I don't think it's any accident that a lot of the new things that got added on to the ascendancies for 321, they are essentially things that are only 2 passive points away, and famously in Ruthless, we only get 3 labyrinths. You don't get 8 ascendancy points in Ruthless, you get 6. And so I don't think that that's an accident that some of the changes that are happening on ascendancies are so that way they're available in Ruthless. So we're seeing an overlap here. We're seeing an overlap in design. We're seeing how one thing is impacting another and how there's a relationship there. We might feel a little betrayed by that. Some people might. Some people might feel very disenfranchised by that. Some people might feel very disillusioned by it. That seems to be the direction of where things are at, that Ruthless is some level of a substitutionary public beta realm, not for how the game is going to look forever, but to test some things out and see what are players doing when they're in this restricted of an environment. Why would designers do this? It's to gather more feedback. It has been a meme since I first started playing Path of Exile 10 years ago. As soon as I went onto the forums and started looking around and poking around, people used to say all the way back in 2013, we are beta testers. We, as the general populace playing Path of Exile, we test the game. The designers then go back in, make changes as we, the players, have played it and given feedback, and then they continue to iterate and develop from there. So in that line of thinking, in that approach, and looking with that 10-year history of a track record as a company, GGG, yes, with their words, might sound a bit deceptive here with Ruthless, that it's just a side project, etc. But at the same time, their actions have said, well, we always do this. We always put out content, see how you as a player base receive it, see how we as a developing team want to continue to iterate on it or not continue to iterate on it, and then we go forward from there. So I think there's a lot of voices involved in this discussion. I think hopefully everybody who's involved can state a little bit of their bias as they're coming to the table to say, this is why I'm feeling, or maybe hopefully conversations like today can help you self-diagnose why you're feeling the way that you're feeling about these sorts of things. I know I've said the R word a whole lot today. Hopefully it hasn't been too much chalk on, or fingernails on the chalkboard. But Ruthless is going to be well received by some, absolutely hated by others, but ultimately it is and has already been a testing basin used by Grinding Gear Games to influence the further development of Path of Exile. If that comes as a shock to you today to hear that from me put it so succinctly, I recognize this is a longer video, but if that comes as a shock to hear that phrase, I'm sorry to be the messenger of good news or bad news or whatever the news that it is, but that seems to be the direction and the pattern of behavior from Grinding Gear Games. Personally, my opinions, I have no problem with this, okay? Not because I'm going to go in and go win a hardcore solo self-found Ruthless race. I can't even interact with maps in Ruthless, dude. I was just trying to get to Kitava multiple times and see what kind of fun I could have there. So I'm in no way, shape, or form am I saying this, just because I'm going to benefit personally from this in some way. I don't benefit at all either way. I don't care. I think it would be amazing the level of difficulty that it is going to require to take down the bosses that are required to take down in Ruthless. It is insane. The amount of power level that you need to take on those bosses. In Trade League, these are bosses that are going down like within the first week relatively quickly, maybe even faster than that in some circumstances. For this to happen in Ruthless, like there were legitimately people who were playing Ruthless for a month before they could get to red maps. All right, and they were playing on 1 or 2 characters. Like, Ruthless is a slog. You're seeing a smile on my face because I enjoyed it while I played through Forbidden Sanctum 320. I enjoyed that slog. I don't think I'm probably going to play it going into 321. I think I want to go back to Trade and use some movement skills and have some fun over there. But it is unto itself a game mode that some players do enjoy, and those players, some of those players who enjoy it, are the devs of Grinding Gear Games. These are the same devs who, many of you are new to Path of Exile, so you don't know this. Chris Wilson originally, when they designed 6 links, said that 6 links are supposed to be aspirational goals for you to get eventually sometime in your playing career of the game. All right, I want you to wrap your mind around that. Think of that. Or if you're a veteran player of the game, just remember that quote. Like, remember how rare these things were supposed to be. And that's just 6 links. Those are things that all of us in a Trade League environment take for granted that we should have by the end of the opening weekend. All right? This is the same design team and some of the same minds who were saying that's the level of speed and progression we're hoping players to eventually have. It used to be that like having a level 21 gem was aspirational content. That was like, no way. Like you actually corrupted your gem and got it right. That's incredible. Several of these things are a part of the core design and the core approach of the people who are, in the most insidious ways, pulling the strings, but also in the best of ways, leading us down the path of development with Path of Exile in general. So if you're worried about like, oh my goodness, is POE all of a sudden going to become Ruthless? It's not. That's some of the brilliance of what's going on with Ruthless. It is its own separate thing. It's not being forced on all the players that everybody's got to play this. So I think we can be somewhat confident that Path of Exile 2, there's a lot of memes out there right now saying, well, Path of Exile 2 is just going to be Ruthless. No, it's not. Okay, no, it's not. This is, again, me spouting off my opinion with no data. Looking at the track record of what Grinding Gear Games does, excuse me, looking at the track record of what Grinding Gear Games does, there's some chance, okay? There's a less than 1% chance that the play pace of Ruthless would be the play pace of Path of Exile 2. Just with everything that they've released informationally and what they've shown on video about Path of Exile 2, the gameplay pace is already much faster than Ruthless. Like, there's movement skills that they showed off like 3 years ago at ExileCon in Path of Exile 2. So I genuinely don't think we need to worry that Ruthless is going to be a one-to-one copy of what the campaign is going to look like in Path of Exile 2. So just be dissuaded of that. Yes, it's technically only my opinion. I have no insider information, but I think there's a good reason for why we can hold that opinion. So I hope that clarifies a little bit of where I stand on all this drama. It's completely valid for streamers who are making money off of this game to go, hey, I don't think I'm going to compete in that boss kill event. It's completely valid, I think, for Grinding Gear Games to say, hey, we want to attract some more eyeballs to this style of playing Path of Exile and potentially attract some more users and some more players interacting with it and giving us more feedback. It's also completely valid for bystanders to just be going, I see a lot of people saying that grinding gear games is going in a scary way or going in a good way. That's completely valid as well. And it's also completely valid, frankly, for a lot of people to be upset and to feel like they've been betrayed. All of these things are completely valid and can come in without any level of moral status that here's a bad guy and here's a good guy, without any of us, slinging poo at each other, as it were, to say, well, you're the bad guy in this scenario, all right? None of us need to do that. None of us need to, degenerate to that level of toxicity where there's name calling and all sorts of different things that can happen sometimes in these scenarios. So be aware of where you're at. Be aware of your own biases as you're coming into this conversation. It would be insane if someone does take this down. Or should I say when? I don't know. But if someone does take down this event and win this, it might very well be the single most legendary thing accomplished in the history of Path of Exile. I don't think that's a stretch. Like, think back to the coolest, most grueling, and most grinding of feats in all of Path of Exile, and this one might be it. Remember, there are many players out there. Some of them are beloved streamers. I'm not going to name any, because whenever I name anybody, somebody thinks I'm calling them out or making fun of them. That's not what I'm doing. When I name somebody, it's because I respect them. But anyway, some players out there enjoy doing, I forget what it's called as a challenge, like the all for one challenge or the one for all challenge, where players are playing in a solo self-found environment and they want to try and acquire every single unique in the game. And they're only playing on their own, and they're like, yeah, I recognize this might be a 10-year plan for playing Path of Exile, but this is my goal. Some players like playing Path of Exile in that way. I'm not saying that there's lots of them, but I'm saying there are some. This level of content to try and take on in Ruthless, these two uber pinnacle bosses, and killing them deathless is insane. I can't think of anything else that would be a higher level of slog. Yes, I'm willing to say that. Of slog, of gruel, of grinding. But that's also in line with a lot of the design philosophies with grinding gear games. The very fact that we're shocked by that GGG doesn't just think we all ought to be grinding for hours on end and that like there's ought to be content that nobody touches. Like, they say that frequently, multiple times, oftentimes in patch notes and development manifestos, etc. Like, hey, we're releasing this content, but we'll see if anybody can get to it. Like, casually, oftentimes developers will say that, but really they're just using it as a marketing tactic to try and get more people to come and play the game. Yeah, can you beat this? And it's like, it's just a marketing tactic. For grinding gear games, it seems to be a lot of the time they actually try to mean that. Hey, we'll see if anybody can actually reach this or not. That seems to be a thing. The last illustration I will give you, and then I will leave you for this discussion. I will be done commenting on this discussion other than interacting with your comments down below. I'm not going to make any other videos discussing this particular dramatic issue, is to say that Ruthless ought to be approached in the way that someone approaches a marathon versus a sprint. If you are watching a track meet, an Olympic event for outdoors, and you are watching sprinters, people who are deemed the fastest people on the planet, they are typically racing races that are much, much shorter in overall distance than people who are considered long distance and cross-country athletes who are taking on, let's say, something like a marathon, or let's say something like the Tour de France, right? In bicycling. There are values to not just being able to race something in a short span of time and be the fastest one in a relatively short environment. There are, in human societies, a value and a societal benefit and even blessing and even admiration of people who are able to do something well for a long period of time, for an extended period of time. And that seems to be what Ruthless is. If you think of Ruthless in that way, you still might hate it. You still might say, I'm never going to do it. But you might be a little bit more receptive to what's going on with Ruthless in general. And it might sound a little bit less like, nails on a chalkboard. And it might sound a little bit more like, I don't know, a bad symphony or something where you go, well, there's beauty there, but I don't really appreciate it. But there's at least some beauty there. Just recognize that there's at least an attempt here to say, what is the longest possible marathon-esque style event that GGG could create? They've done that. They've thrown it out there. We'll see who engages with it. We'll see who actually survives with it. And dare I say, there's going to be some of us, more than just me, who's actually checking the ladder on this and following it, because it's going to be fascinating to see the progress of anybody that can get close. Not even actually accomplish these things, but anybody that can get close to taking these two bosses on. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I hope I've wrapped a bow on at least my own balding, beardless thoughts on the subject. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Thanks once again so much for joining us. We've got lots more discussions that are planned coming out for the rest of the week. We're going to talk about starter builds. We're going to talk about making some predictions for the 321 Crucible League. And we're going to even have some tips for the few of you, the 2 of you out there that enjoy playing Ruthless besides me. We're probably going to have some league starter recommendations for you and some approaches about how to play Ruthless. And of course, we'll have lots of discussions about how to play normal Path of Exile as well, because I think that's where I'm going to be at. Abusing the heck out of, or taking advantage of, just the ability to use some movement skills. Thanks once again for joining us, and I hope the upcoming 321 Crucible League is the league. A Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.